Hello, boys and girls, and welcome back to Ushanka Show. Stories about life in the Soviet Union. Здравствуйте, дорогие товарищи! В эфире программа Ushanka Show. And welcome back to episode number 26, my book review of Black on Red, My 44 Years Inside the Soviet Union by Robert Robinson. And as always, friendly reminder, just in case if you're new to my channel, I have all these videos in a separate playlist called Black on Red, and I'll provide the link below in the comment section. Okay, so it's part 4, chapter 30, summer of 1967, and now the leader of Soviet Union is Leonid Brezhnev. So let's see how the foreigners were treated in the Soviet Union back in 1967. So here Robert Robinson describes his experience as spending another summer vacation at the place of rest located between Moscow and Leningrad. At the first meal at a home of rest, the Russians have a simple custom whereby each guest at a table introduces himself to the person beside him until everyone at the table becomes acquainted. Beginning in 1951, so that's when still Stalin was alive, when Soviet citizens were sternly warned against having anything to do with the foreigners, I was ignored both during these initial greetings and also at the first evening's get acquainted dance. So can you imagine you are at the place of rest with other workers, and just because you have a different color of your skin, you're being totally ignored. So you don't have racism as Robert Robinson experienced in the 30s in the United States, where he couldn't get a job as an engineer, have an engineer degree. In Soviet Union, they just ignore you, pretending you're like not even there. Because the propaganda against foreigners failed to distinguish between an actual foreigner and a person like me, who had been a loyal citizen for many years, the Soviet people treated all non-natives with the same degree of rudeness and suspicion. There were many times, for example, when I would be riding an overcrowded subway with 2 empty seats, one on either side of me. Can you imagine that? So crowded car, but there's empty seats on each side of Robert Robinson. At this particular meal, as I was seated before other guests arrived, when they came and sat down, although I said hello to them, they greeted one another but ignored me. So this is the Soviet-style racism. People don't treat you bad, they just ignore you. And now we're going to jump on a completely different subject. It just happened this way. I guess it's almost like you could say perfect timing. Remember, I mentioned it's the summer of 1967. And what happened in June of 1967? Six-day war between Israel and the Arab countries. About a week into my vacation, Radio Moscow announced that a war had suddenly erupted between Israel and the Arabs. The announcement said that the Arabs were defending themselves violently. On the morning of the 6th day, it was reported that the Israelis had occupied a large portion of Arab territory because of massive supplies given them by the United States. From this report, we could understand that the Israelis had won. Although a vicious barrage of anti-Israeli propaganda was launched over the radio, I was surprised to learn from general conversation that it was not taking hold. Although the prevailing attitude of the Soviet people had been anti-Semitic since the retreat from Moscow on October 16, 1941, compared to the non-white Arabs, the Jews were coming up smelling like roses. Okay, so here we need to pause and talk about October 16, 1941. I'm actually quite surprised that Robert Robinson just kind of skimmed over. He mentions the date and doesn't give any more details, just mentioning that October 16, 1941, and that people had been anti-Semitic since that date. I actually had to look it up. I mean, it's obviously October 1941. Things were not looking good for the Soviet government. Germans were destroying the Red Army and moving on rapidly towards Moscow. But the question why Soviet people had been anti-Semitic that date. So this is what I found. So October 16, 1941 is the date of so-called Moscow Panic. A day before, on October 15, Stalin told members of his government that they probably will need to evacuate Moscow because he was concerned that Moscow will be lost to German troops. My guess Stalin was planning to do evacuation in secret, but the war spread out, and next day, October 16, there was mass exodus of Soviet apparatchiks, Soviet nomenclatura and their families. So there was a giant traffic jam. There were thousands of people on every train station. So then people started breaking into the stores and stealing stuff. Some people were cursing communist leaders that were running away. So there was a giant panic in the city at that day. And that's what Robert Robertson is talking about, that Soviet people had been anti-Semitic since the retreat from Moscow on October 16, 1941. Okay, now back to the book. So he said, the Jews were coming out smelling like roses. It became apparent to me that the Russian rank and file, this was a third-class home of rest where incidentally there were no Jewish guests, did not like Arabs any more than they liked blacks. The night Israel's victory was announced, my 4 roommates, in opposition to official pro-Arab, anti-Israeli policy, shamelessly raised their glasses and drank to the Jewish victory. When I returned to Moscow, I encountered the same anti-Arab, pro-Israeli attitude. And all I can say, the history seems to be going in circles because as I record this video on October 16, 2023, we have once again a war going on between Israel and Palestine, and once again people are dying, and once again Russian government is on the side of Arabs, while probably quite a few people in Russia support Israel. And I'm not sure if you're aware of the fact that 15% of Israelis speak Russian, which means that at some point they immigrated from the former Soviet Union, from Ukraine, from Russia, and other republics, and settled in Israel. Well, my friends, it's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this short video. Don't forget to like it and post a comment, and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye. And now, if some of you guys like Nagruzka, here's my older video about racism in the Soviet Union. Enjoy the show. Of racism in Soviet Union. I think it's pretty interesting to talk about it because on the surface, we had no racism, of course, in Soviet Union because Soviet government promoted the friendship of all the nations, all the peoples in the world in their fight against the global imperialism. So we had hundreds, thousands of banners and posters, picturing different color faces, all united together, like, workers of the world united. It doesn't matter if you're yellow or black or white. We're all together in our battle against the world capitalism. Well, the reality was quite different. Although, this is a situation when, if you don't have black people, you don't really have racism in the country because there's really no one around you to be kind of like your worst characters will show up. I'm trying to think about any example, but, if you we didn't have black people in the Soviet Union, so there was no really racism situation. It's kind of similar what you can think of. In Soviet Union, I was always proud to announce we have no unemployment, but that was the reason why if you don't work, it's illegal not to work. So government will claim, of course, we have zero unemployment because even the ones that don't work, they'll fudge some papers that it looks like they work. So yeah, we didn't have a racism because we didn't have a lot of people of different color. But at the same time, we actually had a racism, and it was quite extreme. And I want to mention right away the language situation. So you probably know that in Spanish, black is negro. And that word kind of went into Russian language. So official word for the black person was negr. So,
if you black skinned person, you're a negro. And that was a normal good word. It wasn't derogative. Now, if you call a black person as black, черный, или чернокожий, black skin person, then this is a kind of like a racist term almost. So if you want to show disrespect, you'll call him he's black or he's black skinned. If you say in a respectful way, you say he's negro, on negro. He's, black person in a good way. So even I live in the capital of Ukraine, Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, which is population around 3 million at that time, or maybe 2.5, I barely met any black people in my life. And so that was quite a shock for me when I came to the United States in 1995, because I got a job in a camp for inner city kids from Chicago. So that was a 100% black camp, kids, counselors, except the camp director and some staff, everyone else was black. And I guess I was scared racist because I was really horrified, because after watching all the movies about, what's going on in the hood, and I was really scared just because I thought they hate white people and they'll just, at least I'll get beat up. I'm not sure about getting killed, but I was really scared for, a couple first weeks till I figure out what's going on. So now during the Soviet Union, the only black people that we had there were students from Africa. So there was quite a educational program going on, and a lot of students came to Moscow, Kiev, maybe Minsk, to the big cities. They had some international departments in universities. Like in Moscow, there was a university, actually it was named after Patrick Lumumba, I believe. So they had a lot of students from Africa. Kiev had a university that had quite a few. I cannot tell you how many. Sorry, I was too lazy to do research, but they be partially paid by the governments. And, they were the countries that are friendly to the Soviet Union. So I guess Soviet Union was sponsoring. So they will study engineering or whatever. But the first thing they had to learn will be to learn Russian. So they come, and first year will be just basically learning Russian language, because we didn't have courses in English or French or whatever the language the country was speaking or people were speaking there. So they will learn Russian, and then they'll study the subjects, get education, they go back to their homeland. And I'm not sure how the things were going in the colleges themselves, in those universities, because they stayed in the dorms. I think they had a separate, more upgraded dorms for foreign students. But the problems, with the regular population, started when those African guys started dating local girls. And that's when the ugly face of Soviet racism showed up. Because people were extremely angry. If you see the girl walking with the black guy on the street, there'll be literally people stopping, old ladies will be yelling at the girls, what's wrong with you? You can't find a boyfriend, local boyfriend, Ukrainian or Russian. Why you have to date this cigarette butts? It's one of the derogative terms used, like my dad was saying it all the time. Because, the end of the cigarette butt is black, so they call them akurak, cigarette butt. So girls will be having getting hard time, and then, of course, black students, they could get in trouble if there'll be some, bunch of young drunk guys seeing a black guy with a white girl. They might just stop them and start harassing, maybe even beat up the guy. Now, I don't know why would local girls want to date African guys. They definitely had way more money, because at that time, we talked many times, those Soviet people were generally poor. The salaries were really low, but since, medical education was free, medical service was free, education was free, housing was pretty inexpensive, rent if you get good housing. So otherwise people didn't have a lot of money. So when those guys came, even from Africa, which is, those countries are not rich, but they had foreign hard currency, and they could bring goods that people paid a lot of money. So all you need to bring with you, Levi's jeans, chewing gum, some other foreign goods, And you can make a killing reselling that stuff in Moscow or Kiev because people will pay, 200, 300 rubles for a pair of Levi's. So you can turn your $50 into 300 rubles, and that's a lot of money. So those guys were rich in Soviet standards, and I guess some girls just like guys who have money, can spend money on them, can give them nice presents that no one can get them here in Soviet Union. Or maybe they just like something exotic, like, maybe some girls always fantasize, I like to date black guy. I don't know, but so there were some ladies that were dating, even they were harassed. Some of them even married the African students and left the country, went to Africa. And I don't know any stories about how good the situation was there. But as I said, everyone, both black boyfriend and a white girlfriend, they both had really hard time in Moscow or Kiev. They were harassed and stuff like that. So we had quite a few racism in that way. And, myself, I'm guilty of that too, because there was some friend of mine told me a story and we all thought it was so funny. And it was they said this girl was riding on a trolley bus late night. So there was one of the last trolley buses. It's about midnight. And they said it was almost empty. There was a drunk guy sitting in the back of the trolley bus, just kind of half asleep. And there was this black African student that was kind of lost. So when a trolley bus stops and doors open and on the stop, I will say bus stop, he will kind of step down, and if somebody on the bus stop, he will ask him, hey, is this such and such stop? Because he's looking for a specific stop that he needs to get off to go back to whatever. And tell him no, and then, of course, doors close. He rides to the next stop, does the same thing, doors open, he steps down, he kind of sticks out his head out of the trolley bus, asking people, is that the specific stop? So at one stop, he does the same. He did the same thing. He kind of leaned out of the trolley bus, so the door opened, and he's asking, what stop is this? And suddenly this drunk guy gets up, kicks this dude in his behind really hard, so the guy flies out of the trolley bus, face down on the blacktop, and this drunk guy yells at him, this is your stop, this is Africa. And door closed, and trolley bus left, and she said whoever was on the trolley bus, including the driver, they just had a really good laugh. And I thought it was so funny, and I'm looking back like, oh my God, it was so mean. But yeah, that's what the drunk guy got. He got tired of hearing this accented Russian, what stop is it? What stop is it? And he just got up, kicked him in the ass, said, Africa! Doors closed, they left, and they thought it was very funny. And even uglier face of Soviet racism was happening in schools, because, when you date a black guy and things maybe didn't work out, like marriage-wise, whatever, you can still get pregnant, right? So there were quite a few girls that got pregnant with the African students, and then maybe they didn't want to do anything with that. They just left for home. So there were girls like single mom with mulatto kids. We call them, if a mix that's mulatto, we say mulat. So you could tell that they're not white, right? They might have a dark curly hair, kind of not black skin, but darker skin. And those kids had horrible time in schools. I remember reading articles in the newspapers, they would be just picked on all the time by other kids. I think some kids maybe even committed suicide, but they were just harassed by children. So not even on adult level, even on a children level, it was really bad. And then, usually mulatto kids, they get, how to say correctly, so they get sexually developed earlier than regular white kids. So, girls already in the 4th, 5th grade will start showing, boobs, and her butt get bigger. So they'll get sexually harassed on the top of being harassed regularly, sometimes get raped. So, yeah, we actually had quite a bad situation with racism in Soviet Union, although it was never in public. But as I said, those places where we had African students, we actually had quite a few ugly things happening between local people Soviet people and the black people. Well, I hope you like this story, and I hope you learned something new about life in Soviet Union. Thank you so much for watching my channel. Please don't forget to put likes under this video, ask questions, put your comments, and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.